Liberal Senator for Victoria, Senator James Paterson, told us when he was successfully pre-selected for the Liberal Party Senate seat for Victoria, told us that his number one priority in his first interview was to get Section 18C changed. As joining us on his now second day sworn in as a senator in the federal parliament. Senator Paterson, good morning to you.
Good morning, John. Thank you for having me.
I presume you're delighted that Section 18C is now the big push from Cory Bernardi and others, but the Prime Minister's asking you not to do this and you're going ahead anyway. Why?
Well, I'm pleased it's on the agenda because I think it's actually very fundamental as to what it is to live in a free society, is to have the ability to freely express ourselves. And I completely understand the Prime Minister's point of view and the government's point of view that this isn't the most urgent priority facing the Parliament, that there are other pressing matters facing the Parliament. That's a fair and reasonable perspective. But I also think that it is something that we can address and we should address after we've dealt with some of those more urgent matters like the CFA legislation, which we'll be debating very shortly, and other important matters from the election.
But the Prime Minister's effectively asked you not to do this at all, but you're going ahead. Why?
Oh, John, I don't think that the Prime Minister's position and my position are actually that far apart. He has expressed his support.
He said so on Insiders with Barry Cassidy on Sunday morning.
Well, I didn't take that interpretation, John. He has said in the past that he's very comfortable with a reform along these lines. He said on Alan Jones last week, for example, that it's a question of not yet rather than not at all. The biggest difference between the Prime Minister and those of us who put this on the agenda is just a question of timing. But I don't even think that the gap is all that big there. We just want it to be addressed sometime this term. No one is suggesting that this be the first bill that we deal with. No one's even suggesting that it has to be dealt with this year. But we do, I think, that it needs to be addressed this term.
Have you got the numbers?
Well, we don't know. We'll have to persuade as many of our government colleagues as possible to get it on the government's agenda. I believe the government should take up this bill as a government bill, and if that happens, we'll be very close. We'll also have to persuade 2 more senators to join us, and I'm hopeful through a possible Senate inquiry that we're able to do that.
Cory Bernardi on 7:30 last night and in other interviews has gone so far as to say he actually thinks that it's borderline racist to oppose these amendments and criticise you and him and the others who are pushing for it. Isn't that a bit absurd?
Oh, I didn't see those exact comments, but I don't think that's what Cory would have meant. And I think you're certainly free, John, to criticise me, as many have, for pursuing this issue. But that won't deter us because we believe it's a really important one to pursue.
Have you ever been discriminated against?
Not in a meaningful sense, not in a sense that most people have suffered, no.
So people who have been are the ones who say this is a useful provision in the Act when it's used properly. People who haven't been want to get rid of it.
I don't agree with that categorisation, John. I've certainly spoken to people who have been subject to discrimination in their lives who agree that this should change. And I don't think there's a unanimous view among people who are from diverse
it's not unanimous,
backgrounds.
But you can find, the overwhelming view of all sorts of people from religious communities, from ethnic communities, from communities that are the ones that have found some support from the fact that these provisions exist. And the whole, dare I call it, the human rights community are the ones saying, don't mess with this, you don't understand what you're doing. And it's the kind of angry white men, to use a phrase that's got currency now, who are the ones going around saying, nah, get rid of it, it's no use.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the human rights community, John, because I don't agree with that at all. There are, in fact, many human rights academics and others who believe that this kind of reform is very reasonable. One example is Sarah Joseph. She's from the Caston Centre for Human Rights at Monash University. Another is Julian Burnside, a prominent human rights lawyer, who said that offend and insult would be a reasonable way of doing this. David Marr, not exactly associated with the conservative side of politics, has also said this is a reasonable reform. I think it's important for your listeners to understand, John, that this proposal to remove offend and insult is actually a much more moderate version of a reform to 18C than was previously proposed under the Abbott government. This is one that's attracted support from across the political spectrum.
Did you have fun yesterday on the first day back at school?
Yes, of course. It's always a privilege to be sworn in as a senator for the great state of Victoria.
And when you had a look at the great unwashed sitting on the crossbenches, what did you make of all of that?
Look, they all have just as much right to be there as I do. They all generated community support for their policies and their ideas, and I think we'll be able to work with them. I hope we'll be able to work with them, and that's certainly our plan.
Have you met with them?
Yes, in fact, John, I attended Senator School last week, so yes. I spent quite a bit of time with some of my new crossbench colleagues.
And what did you learn?
That they're all pretty genuine people, that they've got things that they're passionate about and that they're here to fight for them, and that they have a different way of going about it than perhaps we might. But they're very sincere about what they're pursuing and they are there for the right reasons. And
Tim Wilson has been sworn in as the new member for Goldstein, so you've got your IPA alumni there in numbers now, haven't you?
We've still got a little bit of catching up to do with the union movement, John. Once we get up to about 40 to 50% of the party room, then I'll be satisfied.
Not until then.
No. In all seriousness, I think, we've got a great party room, a really diverse range of people who've come in this term, a lot of new young talent on the coalition side, which is a really exciting thing.
Thank you indeed for your time. Senator
Pleasure, John.
James Paterson, one of the new senators for Victoria from the Liberal Party.